So welcome everyone back to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. Real privilege to have you with us. If you're joining us for the first time, let us let you know that we are the UK's leading pro-marriage organisation. Tens of thousands of people of all faiths and none getting together around this issue that man-woman marriage is special. And we think marriage is the term that describes the thing that only one man and one woman can do. Doesn't mean other things don't take place in a liberal democracy. Of course they do. And it recognises the fact that sadly sometimes marriages break down. But if you're looking at the thing which brings about the best version of the next generation, according to all the evidence, it seems to be that growing up with your biological mum and dad brings that about, and marriage is the thing that brings about the most likelihood of biological mums and dads staying together. That's why we're so keen on marriage. That's why we're so keen on promoting it. It's not necessarily a value judgment. It's not a preference statement. It's looking at the evidence. And if you want the best version of society, marriage seems to be the thing that brings it about. Now, we're talking to all sorts of people from all over the world about that, as you know. Real privilege to have a guest today from an organisation in the US called Focus on the Family. Jeff Johnston, what an absolute joy to talk to you. Would you like to say hi to our viewers and our listeners?
Hello, everybody. And Tony, thank you for having me as your guest.
Well, it's a real privilege. Would you like to take a moment, Jeff, just to tell us a little bit about Focus on the Family and tell us a bit about your background as well?
Sure. Focus on the Family was started about 40 years ago by Dr. James Dobson. He saw what was happening in the culture in the 60s and 70s with the increase in divorce and wanted to use focusing on families as a tool for evangelism as well, for bringing people to Christ. And so we've been founded with 6 pillars. They include things like we believe in the sanctity of human life. We believe that God created us male and female in his image. That children deserve a mom and a dad. We believe in marriage as an institution. And so for years, we've worked through providing resources, through the broadcast, through counseling. People can call in and get a free counseling consultation. We've worked to help strengthen families, to help strengthen marriages, and provide people with parenting resources as well. And I was hired here at Focus about 15, 16 years ago to work with a conference that we had at the time called Love One Out. And at the conference, I would tell my story about leaving homosexuality. And the conference was to encourage Christians and churches to love people who were struggling with these issues, even if we didn't agree with them on the stance they were taking on them. So speaking the truth while you're loving people, doing this courageously and wisely. We tried to give people advice on how to do that. And my job's kind of shifted over the years. Now I'm an analyst for Focus on LGBT issues, but also on marriage and education and sexuality. And I also write for the Daily Citizen, which is our main culture and policy outlet, where we try to explain to people what's going on in the culture and how they can respond to it well, and how they can prepare their families for what's happening in the culture as well.
Yeah, and that's great. And so many things there. Firstly, we'll put up a link to the Daily Citizen and Focus on the Family, but the Daily Citizen especially, because there's loads of great articles on there. And in fact, we'll come back in a moment to a couple of articles written by yourself, which prompted me to get in touch with you. But firstly, Dobson, well, do you know, when our children, they've all grown up apart from one who's almost 18. The other 3 are into their adult years now. But we read Dobson when they were children as new parents and got some great information from him. Would recommend James Dobson to anybody. Absolutely fantastic stuff. So what a joy that is to learn. Now, Jeff, I was reading a couple of articles that you'd written really about the idea around marriage being between a man and a woman. And when you change that definition to ignore gender, the effects that has on the rest of society broadly, in education, all sorts of other places. We're struggling in the UK at the moment with trans ideology, and there's a lot of people who maybe were advocates of same-sex marriage who are saying, hey, that trans ideology has nothing to do with us. That's a bunch of stuff we're not into. And in fact, there's an organization in the US called Gays Against Groomers, who are, very much against the trans ideology and saying, actually, that's nothing to do with us. we're okay sort of thing. And you wrote a couple of articles around that subject. And I wonder if you want to tell us a little bit about what made you write them. What did they say through the lens of kind of marriage being between a man and a woman, if you like? Do you want to take us through those two articles?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, first of all, I've been watching Gays Against Groomers, and I've been watching what was happening in the UK with this. You have a new group, LGB,
Yep.
and they
LGB
completely
Alliance,
leave off the
that's
T.
right.
And I know they got sued
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
for not being the right kind of charity. But I saw that Gays Against Groomers and groups like LGB were trying to distance themselves from gender ideology. And I've always seen the link between the two, between homosexual ideology and gender ideology. First of all, because it's only been in the last 150 years where people have identified themselves by who they're attracted to. In the 1880s, German man, Karl Maria Benarti, I think that's his last name, coined the term homosexual. And he thought of homosexuals as a totally different type of person. And then later on, he or somebody else coined the term heterosexual to be a complement to that, or to be its opposite. But the idea was that this was a separate group of people who were different from the rest of men and women. And that idea slowly caught on. You had gay activism in the 60s and 70s using the slogan, gay is good. And then you had people saying things like, I am gay, or they would talk about somebody being gay. And this is really the first time in history that homosexuality became an identity, or that being gay was somebody's identity. In the past, it might have been something you felt, or attractions you had, or thoughts you had, or even behaviors that people engaged in. But now we're at the stage where this has become an identity. And that's very similar to what you have in gender ideology, where you define people not by their physical body and what their bodies are made for, and the fact that they're made male or female, but they're defining themselves by what's in their head, their thoughts and their feelings about who they are. And so homosexuality wasn't the only thing that paved the way for gender ideology. Feminism was part of it. There are other groups that were part of this, other ways of thinking about people. But homosexuality really was a big part of this. And then along the way, you had groups redefining themselves. So you had groups like the Human Rights Campaign, which used to be a gay advocacy organization, or GLAAD, Gays and Lesbian Against the Anti-Defamation Group, GLAAD. But they've all shifted now to include transgenderism. And especially after the Supreme Court here in the US redefined marriage to include two males or two women, the shift began with a lot of these groups to start pushing transgenderism. And there was a lot of money behind them. And a lot of the money was from these same groups that had been pushing gay ideology. So I saw the link there as well. And as well, you have this link with when you redefine marriage so that sex doesn't matter. Marriage has always been everywhere throughout time and history, the union of a husband and a wife. And yet here in this, last second of history, we've redefined it to include two men or two women. And when you redefine it that way, you're basically saying your biological sex doesn't matter for marriage or for parenting. And it really does matter. And your group knows this. There's a ton of research showing how marriage between a husband and wife benefits children in so many different ways. And yet we've redefined marriage to say, nah, your sex doesn't matter. And so in a way that helps pave the way for transgenderism as well. If my sex doesn't matter for marriage or for parenting, then it doesn't matter for defining who I am, and it doesn't matter for defining how I relate to other people. And so you have all these new genders that have developed over time as well. These false genders, really, but there's hundreds and thousands of them.
Yeah.
And then in addition, when you make up all these new genders, they want somebody to be attracted to them. So they also create new sexual orientations as well. So there's dozens and dozens of new sexual orientations and gender identities, and they're completely separate from who we are as male or female. And through science and through scripture, we know that we're made male and female. Humans come in two types. They don't come gay and straight, they come male or female. And so that whole ideology has shifted and paved the way for this huge surge in transgenderism, which we've seen in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah. And of course, while you might, as what might have been called once upon a time a classical liberal, while one of those might have thought, well, it's entirely up to adults to call themselves or think of themselves however they want to, the challenge comes when these things are recognized by law. So once marriage takes gender out of the definition, well, you then have to teach these things in schools. And that has significant implications, as we're finding across the country in schools up and down the land. All sorts of absolutely bizarre things are happening. And I'm sure it's the same in the US.
Oh, definitely. And, this just didn't start 10 years ago, even. In the 80s, the first group that was pushing homosexuality in schools was formed, and it was called Project 10. And it started in Los Angeles with a woman named Virginia Uribe. And she thought that 10% of all students were gay or lesbian, or maybe bisexual. She probably wouldn't have included transgender identified individuals at that point. But Los Angeles schools started embracing this. And then you had other groups like this, even the Southern Poverty Law Center and the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, and groups like the Human Rights Campaign and the Great Gay Straight Alliances. They began pushing this into public schools, first of all, under the guise of protecting children from bullying. And so they wanted to create safe spaces, which is a good thing. We don't want anybody to be bullied for anything.
Correct.
But they
absolutely correct.
Yeah. We don't want that. But they specifically spotlighted homosexuality. And then over time, even those things began to change, and they began embracing transgenderism. And California here in the US was the first state to actually pass a law saying that throughout all the social studies, history, geography, geology, all the different psychology, all the different social studies that you have to teach about the experiences of LGBT identified people. And so textbook manufacturers, publishers jumped on the bandwagon. They started producing textbooks that included, in history and social studies, folks with LGBT identities. And so they started identifying people in history based on who they were attracted to and how they felt about themselves on the inside, rather than even their real historical accomplishments. And so now I think there's about 6 or 7 states here. My own state, Colorado, is one of them, where we passed a law too, saying that when you teach social studies from grades pre-K all the way up to 12th grade, you have to talk about LGBT identified individuals. And then this began moving into schools in other ways here in the States too. Comprehensive sexuality education. In 2019, Colorado passed a law saying that if your school teaches sex ed, it has to be comprehensive, and it has to teach about the experiences of LGBT identified people. And so even in kindergarten, they don't necessarily talk about sexuality, but they will start talking to kindergartners about gender identity and how what they feel on the inside may be disconnected from their body. And so it's really kind of it's a Gnosticism. You're separating the body from the soul or the spirit and saying those are two different entities. And they're teaching this to kindergartners.
And out of interest, more children have diabetes than are LGBT identified. So do they include diabetes in every part of the curriculum too?
No, they don't. They tend to focus just on sexuality.
Yeah. Which is bizarre in itself. And part of the UK, Scotland, which no doubt you will be very familiar with, they're trying to pursue an agenda at the moment of including it in every aspect of the curriculum, every aspect of the maths, anything. You've got to include it in that part of the curriculum too. And you wonder, it just doesn't make a lot of sense, just to pick one aspect of human character, which is sexuality, which is not something you'd think you'd emphasize with young children anyway, at kindergarten, as you mentioned, and include it in every aspect. It just seems bizarre. What do you think is going on, Jeff?
Well, I think there's a couple things behind that. First of all, you have Freudian psychology, where he tended to tie everything to sex, with the Oedipus complex and penis envy, things like that. Everything was tied to sex. Yeah. And then you had people like John Money and Alfred Kinsey taking that and saying, children are sexual from birth. Well, they are sexual in that they're male or female, and they have body parts which, feel good, but they're not sexual the way adults are. So groups like Planned Parenthood, there's a booklet that the International Federation of Planned Parenthood put out. It's called Exclaim. And it says children have sexual rights, and those rights start at birth. And they cover everybody at any age. Now, they do talk about being age appropriate when you talk to children, but they start way, way early. And they start talking about gender identity and sexual orientation when children are very young. And kids aren't made to bear the weight of grown-up sexuality. They're not made that way. And so what's happening is these kids get sexualized. Their sexuality is aroused too early, and they're also creating confusion in these children. If you tell a 5-year-old a boy, well, you might really be a girl, they believe what grown-ups tell them. They believe what teachers tell them. So it's this push rooted in this ideology that says we're sexual from birth. The other thing this ideology says is that sex is about pleasure primarily. Whereas we know it's about bringing forth the next generation. It's about uniting a husband and wife together in marriage. There are other purposes for sex. Pleasure is certainly a byproduct and a fun one, but it's not the main purpose of sex. But that's the operating principle that these groups go under when they're pushing this ideology. You're sexual from birth, and sex is mainly about pleasure, and you have sexual rights that start at birth.
And the opposite is true. We came across a teaching material just this last week, which encouraged teachers to avoid talking about long-term relationships or marriage in their RSE lessons. So not far away from actually having balance and just brushing past these things, to avoid any reference to long-term relationships and marriage. And you think, well, my goodness, why would you want to avoid talking about the thing which, on an evidence base, brings about the best outcomes and, in fact, is the best predictor of happiness still for adult men and women? Why would you avoid talking about it?
Well, you're right. There's just loads of research and evidence that show that married people tend to be happier on average, that married people with children tend to be happier. And it's rooted in this idea that you can't make anyone feel bad for any reason. And so if somebody only has one parent, you might make them feel bad if you talk about two-parent families and mom and dad families. It's also rooted in this idea that, the idea of intersectionality, which came out of Marxism and critical race theory and other critical theories, which has to do with the idea that people are either oppressor or oppressed, and they're either oppressors or victims. And so parts of you might, inside, you might have parts of you that are victim or oppressed as well. And so they've been doing exercises in schools where they have kids write about which part of me is the oppressor, which part is the victim. And of course, the oppressors are white, male, Christians who speak English. And everybody else is oppressed at different levels. And so transgender individuals tend to come at the bottom of the list of, or the top of the list, I guess you would say, of those who are victims and oppressed. And children with same-sex parents, they would be oppressed by our society if we push what they call heteronormativity, that male and female united in marriage is normal. Well, it is normal. It's normal throughout history and throughout all time.
And it's normal in a technical, statistical sense. And if it wasn't, we wouldn't exist. I mean, it's
That's
just
right.
one of
I
those
mean,
things.
our bodies are created with a purpose, and
Yeah,
the body shows its purpose by how it's created. I'm a
yeah,
man. I'm made
yeah,
to have the
yeah,
potential to be a father. That's what men are, and a
yeah, yeah.
woman is made with the potential to be a mother.
So, whatever the motives are, and it's self-perpetuating and self-feeding. Some people will say it'll be self-correcting. Let's hope so, because the alternative isn't good. And if you look at the teachings of people like Unwin, 1930s Oxford anthropologist, we are demonstrating the signs of societies that soon cease to exist, which isn't great. But in terms of what we can do about it, now I know you've got to separate our supporters come from all faiths and none. A lot of them are Christians, and Christians are saying, well, the church should recognize this is just wrong. It should speak more about marriage and identify what is and isn't sin. Absolutely right. Completely agree with that. But then also in terms of secular governments, and if we want to influence governments, we don't approach them with scripture because they don't believe. So we have to approach them with evidence and good ideas for change. How do we make it better so nobody gets bullied? That's not what we want. Nobody feels ostracized in a liberal democracy, yet we restore the value that families bring to society, which helps everyone, not just the families. What do we do, Jeff? How do we get back to a sensible position?
Well, we've been encouraging parents for a number of years to begin by talking to your children. And you're
Great.
not talking to them about sex. You're
Yeah.
just talking about how there are boys and girls. Boys and girls are different, and they're both good, and we don't treat people badly because they're one or the other.
Yeah.
And so we need to inculcate that into our children. We need to teach them that marriage is between a husband and a wife. And then that's a good thing, that children do best when they're raised by the mom and dad that brought them into the world. And again,
Yeah.
you're not talking about sex, you're talking about moms and dads and
Yeah.
what children need and why they need a mother and father and how mothers and fathers complement each other. So I think we start by giving our children that foundation, and we can do that in churches as well.
Yeah.
In Sunday school, the pastor talking about these issues. And so we need to bring back this idea that people aren't made gay, straight, transgendered, all these other things, but we're male and female, created in the image of God, and that both are good and we value both, but they are very different from each other.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the laws, I believe it's really important that we have laws that help families that don't harm them, and that we have laws that help women and don't harm them. So here in the States, there are a couple different campaigns that have started just in the last few years, and they've been very successful in some states. One of them is a push to create laws that protect children from puberty blockers, hormones, and surgeries. And those are usually called help not harm laws. We want to help the children to embrace their bodily reality,
Yep.
not harm them by these destructive procedures and medical interventions.
Yep.
Another group of laws that's been passed in a lot of different states are laws that save girls' sports. Sports were separated into male and female, men's and women's for reasons, because men tend to be stronger and bigger and have heavier bones and more muscle mass and bigger hearts and lungs than women do. And so women's sports were created to protect women from having men play them. And so I believe in laws that protect women in that way. I also believe in laws that protect privacy and safety in dorm rooms, in restrooms, in showers, in locker rooms, in spas. We need to protect women and children because men, on average, if there's going to be a predator, it's more likely to be a man than a woman. And that's part of what testosterone does to men. And it's part of how we can be broken as well. So we want to protect women and children in those private spaces. And I think we need to do things like that and push for laws like that. What's happening, too, is that the other side is also pushing, they're promoting speech laws where they say you shouldn't even be allowed to misgender somebody or use the wrong pronoun or use the wrong
Yeah.
name. And so we
Yeah.
need to be advocates for freedom of religion and
Yeah.
free speech.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of groups in the US fighting for that. I know there's some in England as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's
Again,
going to be
it's
really
a pressure we've
important.
got too. Yeah.
Yeah, to protect our speech. I mean, the fact that you have groups saying you shouldn't even be allowed to talk about certain things, and then they're pushing this agenda on children, that's horrific. It's a stifling of religious freedom and free speech.
And let's teach a bit of history as well, because people need to know what's happened in the past when we've done that, and when that's happened in other parts of the world, and essentially it doesn't end well. You know, we've got examples of many, many millions of people being killed by the state. That's what that seems to have turned into when we've tried it in the past. So it's not a good idea. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, pretty important things to the long-term survival of your nation, I would say.
Oh, you're right. When the state has that much power, it tends to abuse it, and people get harmed, and so that's not a good thing. So we want to keep fighting for freedom and for families and for freedom of religion, for faith as well.
Great. Well, listen, you are doing a fantastic job. I think your organisation is doing a fantastic job. I want to encourage everyone again to pop across, to focus on the family, and also we'll put up the link again to the resource of all the articles, cultural based articles, which again are fantastic. A real good deep resource of solid, sensible, reasonably argued stuff. And thank you for all the work you're doing, Jeff. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again soon.
Yeah, I'd love that, Tony. That would be great. It's been very good talking to you.
With Jeff Johnston, Focus on the Family. What a privilege to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.